Hi everybody and welcome. Wherever you are, I hope you're resting somewhere soft in the hush of evening, where the light has dimmed just enough to let the mind wander. Tonight we begin a slow, quiet journey through time, one that doesn't march but meanders like a sleepy river under a pale winter moon. We're going to meet some very old friends you might have heard of, though you likely don't know them very well. They were called Neanderthals. Now I know what that word conjures. Perhaps you're picturing a hulking figure with shaggy hair, clutching a club and grunting at the stars. Or maybe a museum diorama, frozen in mid-step, staring blankly ahead with a suspiciously modern haircut. But tonight, I want to brush away all that noise and bring you into their real world, a quieter world, a stranger one, and in many ways a far more beautiful one. Let's start with a picture. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine Europe, but not as you know it now. This is Europe as it was 100,000 years ago. Not cities and highways, not crowded cafes or shining skylines, but endless stretches of forest and stone. Pines swaying in an icy wind. Vast plains, quiet and cold, dotted with herds of woolly mammoths. Mountains older than memory. A stillness that pressed in on everything. In this world, there are no lights save the moon, the stars and the orange flicker of firelight from the mouths of caves. And inside those caves, bundled in furs, huddled around those little flames, lived the Neanderthals. They weren't many. Even at their peak, it's likely their total population never exceeded the number of people who live in a small town today. They were scattered like stardust across the continent, isolated, enduring, and somehow thriving. Now here's the surprising thing. They weren't our ancestors. Not exactly. We didn't evolve from them. Instead, they were a cousin species, another branch on the human tree. They shared a common ancestor with us Homo sapiens about 600,000 years ago, then wandered down their own path, one carved through cold, hardship, and deep time. And yet, in many ways, they were incredibly human. Their brains were, on average, just as large as ours, sometimes even larger. They built tools, sophisticated ones. They knew how to make fire, how to hunt as a group, how to butcher massive animals with expert precision. They may have spoken, though their voices, if they had them, are lost to us now. Still, the shape of their vocal tract suggests it's quite possible. But the most haunting detail, they cared. We have found the skeletons of Neanderthals who were old, sick, or injured, and who lived long after their injuries would have made them helpless. One man had a withered arm and blindness in one eye. Another had a crushed foot that left him unable to walk. And yet they lived on. Someone fed them, protected them, kept them warm. There is tenderness there, a slow-burning gentleness in a frozen world. It's this humanity, familiar but oddly shaped, that draws us to them. Neanderthals were not monsters. They were not beasts. They were not failed versions of us. They were them, distinct, whole, mysterious. And so, in this series of stories, we're going to step softly through their world, not just through the science, but through the feeling of their lives. We'll visit caves where their footprints still linger. We'll watch them paint with ochre and carve bone. We'll listen for laughter in a glacial night. And we'll wonder, quietly, gently, why they disappeared and what of them still lingers in us. Because yes, if you are of non-African ancestry, you likely carry between 1 to 2% of Neanderthal DNA. It's not just trivia. It's a trace of breath in your blood. A story that didn't end but was folded into our own. And so tonight we light the first candle of this tale. Just one, to start. It flickers gently in the dark. We won't rush. This is not a story that demands urgency. It is one that asks only for attention, for curiosity, for a certain softness. Let us go back again to that night, tens of thousands of years ago. The snow falls quietly outside. In a rocky shelter somewhere in what we now call Croatia, a small band of Neanderthals shares warmth. The fire crackles. One of them, perhaps a child, draws patterns in the ash with a stick. An elder hums softly, maybe a song, maybe just the sound of contentment. Their faces are unlike ours, but not so unlike. Their hands, rough and wide, cradle each other with surprising delicacy. They do not know the future. They do not know extinction or fossilization or genetic legacy. They know only this moment and the cold and the comfort of others. This is where our journey begins. Each night from now, we'll pull back the layers of their world. We'll meet them not as curiosities, but as companions. And maybe, just maybe, we'll come to feel a strange kinship. Across time, across silence, across everything. For now, rest. Let the snow fall behind your eyes. Let the wind of another age drift through your thoughts. And when you sleep, may your dreams carry the soft footsteps of those who once walked before us, quietly, fiercely, beautifully human. Good night. It was a quiet afternoon in the summer of 1856, near the sleepy valley of Neander in western Germany. The world at large was still turning without much concern for ancient bones or the silent voices of deep time. Coal miners in the Feldhofer cave not far from Dusseldorf were busy with their labor, cutting into limestone with little thought to what lay beneath. But fate, or chance, or perhaps a sleepy kind of destiny, had other plans. As the miners chipped away at the rock, something strange emerged. A skullcap. Then fragments of bones, an arm here, a leg there, and finally a nearly complete skeleton, though weathered and imperfect, slumbering in sediment for over 40,000 years. At first, no one knew what to make of it. The bones were human, but not quite. The skull was too thick. The brow ridges were heavy, sloping forward like a cliff over deep eyes. The limbs were strong, almost too strong, powerful in a way that spoke of something ancient, something not entirely like us. They brought the remains to Johann Karl Fuhlrott, a schoolteacher and naturalist. He wasn't a celebrity, not a man of wealth or prestige, just someone who paid attention to the quiet voices in stone. And when he looked at the bones, he saw something remarkable, not diseased, not deformed, but different. He sensed even then that this was a different kind of human, one from an age before memory. This discovery, though now seen as the dawn of Neanderthal study, did not ignite immediate celebration. Quite the opposite. At the time, the idea of human evolution was still controversial. Charles Darwin wouldn't publish on the origin of species until 3 years later in 1859. The notion that humans might have cousins, older, stranger cousins, was unsettling to many. It ruffled feathers and rustled dogma. Some insisted the bones belonged to a modern human afflicted with rickets or syphilis. Others suggested it was an unfortunate Cossack soldier from the Napoleonic Wars who had died in the cave. Anything but what they truly were, a separate kind of human. A whisper from an ice age long buried. It would take decades of careful, often lonely research before the truth became clear. That this was no accident, no diseased soldier. This was the first meeting between our kind and the Neanderthals, not in flesh but in fossil. And yet what strikes me most about this tale is not the scientific debate or the storm it stirred in Victorian minds. It's the quiet poetry of it. Imagine the Neanderthal, whoever he was, who died in that cave so long ago. He had no idea that he would one day be unearthed by strange men with shovels, that his bones would sit in glass cases, that people in far-off lands would whisper his name before bed. He simply lived. He breathed the air of a colder world. He might have hunted elk, watched the northern lights curl across the sky, laughed with companions around a fire, and then he passed as all living things do, and the earth kept his secret for tens of thousands of years, until that warm German afternoon. There's something deeply humbling about that. From this one discovery, others followed. Caves in Belgium, in France, in Croatia, teeth in children's jaws, tools shaped by ancient hands. The puzzle grew richer, and slowly, so did our understanding. And yet every piece of that puzzle began with this moment. In the quiet valley of Neander. It's no coincidence that the valley's name became their name, Neanderthal, from Neander, and the German word for valley, Tal. So, literally, Neander's valley. Though curiously, Neander himself was a 17th century hymn writer who loved nature and long walks, a man of quiet reverence. Perhaps it's fitting, then, that his name became tied to another gentle soul from long ago. There is something meditative in how these threads connect. The modern world often moves so quickly. We want facts fast and answers faster. But these ancient stories don't obey that pace. They take their time. They arrive slowly, like mist rising from a morning lake, and so should we. Tonight, as you listen, try to imagine what it must have felt like for those 19th century scientists peering into the past through fragments of bone, wondering who this was, wondering what it meant. And try also to imagine the Neanderthal himself, not as a fossil, but as a being of breath and warmth, standing at the cave entrance, squinting into the pale sun, not knowing that he would one day become the subject of bedtime stories. His life was real as yours, as real as this moment now. And perhaps that's the lesson in all this, that we are all part of a much older, stranger story than we often realize. That beneath our cities and beneath our skin, ancient echoes still linger, that bones long silent can speak again, not with noise, but with presence. That's the day we met them, not with fanfare, not with shouts, but with a shovel, a soft breeze, a question whispered into stone, and with that we turn the page. If you were to meet a Neanderthal on a quiet forest path, say just as the mist was lifting and birds were beginning to sing, you might stop in your tracks, unsure of what you were seeing. Was it a man, a shadow, some cousin from a dream half remembered? Because to look upon a Neanderthal is to look upon something hauntingly familiar and unmistakably other. Let's start with the skull. Imagine holding it, not in fear but in wonder. It's heavy in the hand, denser than ours. The forehead is low, almost sloping, as if the very bones had tired of reaching for the sky. But just above the eyes are ridges, thick, pronounced, like stone ledges. They cast the eyes into shadow, giving the Neanderthal face a depth that feels ancient, unreadable. The nose, though, the nose. It's large, strikingly so. Not a delicate feature, but one broad and proud, shaped by millennia of icy wind. That nose wasn't a mistake. It was a marvel of adaptation. Wide nasal passages helped warm cold air before it reached the lungs. A breathing machine for a cold planet. Now picture the jaw, broad, powerful, with no dainty chin to speak of. The teeth inside? Big, robust. These weren't built for smoothies. These were the teeth of a species that chewed on leather, crunched through bone, stripped sinew with a patience that today would seem otherworldly. And yet, there's something almost soulful in the Neanderthal gaze. Reconstructions of their faces based on bone and muscle maps show eyes deep-set, sometimes melancholy, sometimes curious. Artists can't help but give them a certain softness, as if they were always listening, always remembering. Their bodies, too, were a study in strength, stocky but not sluggish. Their bones were thicker, their joints broader. The ribcage was barrel-shaped, their waists short and compact, legs powerful but not long, arms muscled and built to endure. Their hands were broad with strong thumbs, a grip that could crush or cradle. Neanderthals weren't tall. Most stood around 5'5", give or take, but height was not their calling card. Density was, strength, durability. They were built for survival, not for speed or slenderness. Their fingers were so strong that scientists have estimated they could make fists that rivaled modern athletes. But those same fingers could also carve intricate tools, delicately shape flint and sew with bone needles. And their feet, often overlooked, were surprisingly modern, arched, stable, meant for walking long distances, not sprinting. Imagine seeing one crouched by a stream, scooping water with cupped hands, fur draped over shoulders, hair wild, perhaps braided, perhaps left to roam. skin weathered by wind, but not without beauty. Imagine the sound of breath slow and steady, the blink of thick lashes, the tilt of a curious head. Would you speak to them? Would they speak back? The truth is, we don't know exactly what colors they wore. Skin tone, hair, eyes, it's all guesswork, woven from hints in ancient DNA. Some studies suggest they may have had lighter skin than previously thought. Some possibly red hair, blue eyes in some regions, dark in others. But what matters isn't the palette, it's the texture of their being. Neanderthals were not monsters, not cave-dwelling beasts. They were flesh and thought and silence. They were shaped by the Ice Age not into villains but into survivors. And in that survival there was elegance. Consider this. Their brains were as large as ours, sometimes larger, but shaped differently. The back of their skulls bulged, a sign, perhaps of powerful visual memory, a mind built for navigating terrain, tracking prey, noticing the flicker of movement in distant trees. And that strength, their astonishing strength, was not for show. It was necessary. The world they lived in was not forgiving. To hunt a mammoth or fight off a cave lion, one needed more than willpower. One needed muscles honed by generations. Yet for all this, they were not without gentleness. They adorned themselves, wore jewelry of a sort, eagle talons, perforated shells, red ochre, rubbed into skin. Perhaps they braided their hair, painted their faces, not for function but for feeling. They buried their dead. Not always, but often enough that it matters. And with flowers sometimes. With care. With grief. So if you saw one today, not on a forest path, but in a crowded street, dressed in modern clothes, hair trimmed, posture adjusted, you might not even notice. You'd pass by thinking, what a strong-looking person, and carry on with your day. And maybe that's the point. That the strange isn't always distant, sometimes it walks beside us. Neanderthals were strange to us, yes, but only just. Strange in the way dreams are strange. In the way your reflection sometimes looks unfamiliar. They were close, so close. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, think of a Neanderthal looking back. Not in challenge, not in fear, but in quiet curiosity. They were not what we thought. They were not what we feared. They were simply themselves. And isn't that, in the end, what we all hope to be? Imagine a dark cave, deep in the hills of what we now call France. The wind outside moans gently, brushing snow along the ground in soft, determined gusts. Inside, there is fire, a small, flickering hearth, casting a warm glow that dances across stone walls and fur-covered backs. In that glow, a figure leans forward. His brow casts a shadow over his eyes, but those eyes are intent, focused. In one hand, a chunk of flint. In the other, a hammerstone. Then, clack. A chip falls. The sound rings in the still air like the crack of a distant bell. He pauses, tilts the flint, adjusts, then clack again. Another shard, another gleam. Slowly, steadily, a shape emerges. Not beautiful, perhaps, but purposeful. A blade, a scraper, a tool. This was not mindless work, not brute smashing. This was craft. The Neanderthals were tool makers, not by accident, but by instinct, by tradition. For over 200,000 years, they shaped stone with remarkable skill. They left behind an entire industry, a language of flint, if you will, that we now call the Mousterian tradition. Named after Le Moustier, a site in the Dordogne, it is a signature as distinct as any artist's. Their tools were not primitive. They weren't just smashing rocks together and hoping for the best. They selected the right kind of flint, hard but not brittle. Chert, sometimes. Quartzite. Even obsidian where it could be found, though rare. They understood fracture. They knew angles. They used a technique called levallois, a method of preparing a stone core so that with a final blow, it would produce a flake of exactly the size and shape desired. Imagine that. Not random, but calculated. Like chess, but with rocks. They made scrapers for hides, points for spears, burns for engraving. Some even used hafting, attaching the stone to a wooden shaft using resin and sinew. It's a small detail, easily overlooked. But think about what that means. It means they understood materials, adhesives, the fusion of wood and stone and muscle. In the flickering half-light of their caves, Neanderthals passed down these skills, not through writing, not through blueprints, but through quiet demonstration. A father showing a son, a mother guiding a daughter's hand, flint against flint, spark against shadow. And then there was fire. The hearth was more than warmth. It was a workshop, a gathering place, a companion in the long dark. Neanderthals could make fire, likely through striking pyrite against flint to create sparks. They maintained it, protected it, kept it alive like a fragile, glowing animal. Fire was memory, fire was survival, and around that fire they shaped their world. Their tools tell a story not just of function, but of intention. They adapted to their environments. In open steppe, they shaped blades for hunting. In wooded valleys, more scrapers for processing fur and hide. They even experimented. Some tools show signs of being sharpened and reshaped multiple times, worn down, then reimagined. Efficiency born not from laziness, but wisdom. Even bones became tools. Antlers used as hammers, ribs used to smooth hides. The world, to a Neanderthal, was a toolbox, a whispering array of shapes and textures waiting to be useful. But perhaps the most astonishing thing isn't the tools themselves. It's the care with which they were made. Some archaeologists describe the sensation of holding a Neanderthal blade as eerie. There is a balance to it, a feel in the hand that's hard to explain. Not jagged, not careless, but right. And it makes one wonder, when a Neanderthal sat down to make a tool, did he hum to himself? Did she glance up, smiling as a child brought more flint? Was there pride in the perfect flake, frustration in a shattered edge? These tools were not just survival, implements. They were artifacts of thought, of planning, of culture. And they traveled. Neanderthal tools have been found far from their sources, suggesting they were carried across valleys, traded perhaps, or kept as precious. A favorite scraper, a trusted blade. The quiet poetry of this cannot be overstated. That in a world of howling wind and prowling beasts, the Neanderthals sat by firelight and shaped stone into meaning, again and again, across generations. And what remains now? Shards, flakes, blades dulled by time, but also fingerprints, fossilized in clay, use-wear patterns under microscopes, traces of resin where sinew once wrapped, evidence of lives lived carefully, not recklessly, not chaotically, but with rhythm, with memory. So tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine your hands on that flint. Feel the smooth coolness. Hear the clack of the strike. Smell the faint tang of fire and skin and dust. You are not holding a rock, you are holding a thought from another world, a whisper chipped in stone, and that perhaps is the greatest tool of all. When we imagine early humans, we tend to think of survival, of harsh winds and hunted meat, of endurance and fire. But in the stillness between hunts, in the flicker of firelight and the rustle of birds overhead, something softer stirred in Neanderthals, something beautiful. Because despite all assumptions, despite the old caricature of the brutish cave dweller, Neanderthals had an eye for the aesthetic, a sensibility for color, for form, for the strange joy of ornament. And it began, it seems, with a feather. Archaeologists have discovered evidence, subtle, fragile, that Neanderthals plucked feathers not just from birds they ate, but selectively. Carefully, not for blankets or bedding, but for something else. In caves across Europe, bones of birds of prey, eagles, vultures, hawks, have been found with precise cut marks, not butchery but removal, specifically of wing feathers, the dark, dramatic ones. Imagine a Neanderthal sitting by the fire, a feather in his hand, running his fingers along the shaft, feeling the texture, the shimmer, maybe slipping it into his hair behind an ear or weaving it into fur, not for warmth, not for use, but for beauty. And what is beauty, if not a message that says, I am here, I see, I feel? They did more than collect feathers. They painted. Yes, painted. With ochre, red and yellow iron-rich earth, mixed perhaps with animal fat or water, or even spit. Some Neanderthal sites contain pieces of pigment shaped from use, worn down like crayons. Others show signs of scraping and grinding, a deliberate preparation, like an artist setting up their palette. In a cave in Spain, researchers found cave paintings dated over 64,000 years old. That's before Homo sapiens arrived in Europe. The images, simple, dots, lines, geometric symbols, not portraits, not animals, but marks, chosen marks. Some were on stalactites, some surrounded handprints, and perhaps that is what they were. Handprints left for no reason other than to say, I was here. This was not idle doodling. It was communication, perhaps not of words, but of presence, of identity. They also adorned themselves with shells. In southern Spain, perforated shells, some stained with pigments, have been discovered in Neanderthal contexts. They were likely strung on cords worn around the neck, necklaces. Even now the idea feels astonishing. A being with a thick brow ridge, powerful arms, and a wide nose, pausing to thread a red-stained shell through twine, smiling perhaps at the weight of it, admiring the curve of the spiral. These were not accidents. These were acts of choice, of design. And what does that tell us? That Neanderthals, despite all the labels we've given them, primitive, slow, extinct, were capable of feeling moved by color, moved by contrast, moved by the glint of sunlight on a feather's edge. It's easy to forget, in our world, of glowing screens and glass towers, that beauty once began in such small gestures. A stone marked red, a shell worn smooth, a feather placed just so. Did these ornaments have meaning? Perhaps. Some might have been symbols of status, of family, of memory. Or they may simply have been liked, the way a child today pockets a pebble. The way we choose earrings not just for function, but for feeling. This changes how we see them. Because to decorate oneself is to declare that function is not enough, that life is more than surviving, that we are, at our core, creatures of reflection. They didn't have mirrors, but maybe a puddle served, or a friend's eyes, or the feeling of a painted pattern drawn slowly across the skin. Imagine a Neanderthal, woman painting her arms before a gathering. Imagine a man braiding red sinew through his hair before a hunt, not to intimidate, but to honor the day. Imagine children laughing as they string feathers together, not quite understanding why it feels special, but knowing that it does. It makes them feel real. It makes them feel not so different from us. And maybe that's the gentle truth beneath all this, that the desire to create, to adorn, to leave a mark, is ancient, deeper than history. It did not begin with us. It began with them, with stone and fire and feather, with a shell worn against the heart. So as you close your eyes tonight, think not just of survival. Think of beauty in strange places. Think of a cave filled with firelight and laughter, where someone once traced a line of ochre on another's cheek and smiled, not because it was useful, but because it was beautiful. Silence. That's where most stories of the Neanderthals begin, in the hush of ancient caves, in the soft layers of soil where their bones rest, in the gaps between what we know and what we long to understand. But perhaps it's not silence, after all. Perhaps there were voices, low, rhythmic, warm. Perhaps there was song. Tonight we explore a question wrapped in mystery. Did Neanderthals speak? Did they sing? Did they laugh and whisper and hush one another by firelight? We may never know for certain. The past rarely offers recordings, but it gives us clues, fragments, bones, echoes of anatomy that hint at sound. Let's begin with the mouth. The shape of the Neanderthal hyoid bone, a small horseshoe-shaped structure in the throat essential for speech, is almost identical to our own. It's the kind of bone that holds no drama. It doesn't announce itself, but it anchors the tongue, supports the larynx, and allows the complex dance of vowels and consonants. A hyoid like ours means that, structurally, Neanderthals could have spoken. Their skull base, too, had the angle and length needed for a vocal tract similar to ours. Not identical, but close. Close enough for speech. Of course, anatomy is only part of the story. Speech is also brain work, and the Neanderthal brain was large, comparable in volume to ours, though shaped differently. Some areas of the brain involved in language, like Broca's area, appear to have been similarly developed, so the machinery was there. But did they use it? Some say yes. After all, cooperation in Neanderthal life was essential. Hunting in groups, sharing knowledge, teaching children. It's hard to imagine all this happening in absolute silence. And yet, we have no writing, no transcriptions. Their words, if they spoke them, are lost to time. So we turn to imagination. Picture a small family group gathered near the cave's mouth. The snow falls in silent curtains beyond, but inside the fire warms. A mother leans over, murmuring to her child, not loudly, but in a steady rhythm. Is it language, perhaps? Or a proto-language, a system of sounds, gestures, facial expressions, that together say, "You're safe. Stay close." Look, communication doesn't have to be like ours to be rich. Some theories suggest that Neanderthals may have used pitch and tone more than complex syntax. Their speech may have sounded musical, rising and falling like wind through trees, less like sentences, more like songs. Others propose a language of touch and eye, a tap on the shoulder to mean go, a nod to mean yes, a raised brow for danger. And still others believe they may have developed full spoken language, not identical to ours, of course, but complete in its own right. A world of names for tools, places, feelings. Words passed from mother to child again and again until they became memory. What would it feel like to hear a Neanderthal speak? Not rough or animalistic as once assumed, but deep, grounded, with tones that resonated in the chest. Perhaps slow and deliberate, like someone always choosing words carefully. And if they sang, oh, what a sound that might be. Not opera, not lullabies as we know them, but chants, hummed lines repeated in the stillness, breath rising in unison, songs to call the herd, or mark the dusk, or ease the ache of sorrow. Did they have poetry? Did they tell stories of the stars, or of the bear that wasn't caught? Did they whisper warnings of spirits in the fog, or recall the shape of a friend now gone? Perhaps language for them wasn't just practical. Perhaps, like us, they spoke to remember, to connect. And what of laughter? That, too, is a form of language. Social mammals laugh. Chimps, rats, even dogs in their own way. It's the sound of relief, of release, of shared understanding. Could a Neanderthal laugh? We think so. The shape of their chest and lungs suggests they had the breath control for expressive vocalization. A joke, perhaps clumsy, passed between companions over a botched hunt. A child giggling at a tickle, then fleeing into the dark. The idea softens them, doesn't it? It makes them feel not just close in form, but close in feeling. Because whether they had grammar or syntax or conjugated verbs, what matters more is that they connected, that they reached for one another across the cold, that they looked into each other's eyes and said, through sound or sign, I am here. I see you. You matter. That, more than any dictionary, is language. So tonight, as you lie in the quiet, imagine their voices, not perfectly understood, not translated, but felt, like a hand pressed gently to your chest, like a song hummed, in the dark like the first word ever spoken, not out of need, but out of love. There is something deeply comforting about the idea of home. Not four walls and a roof necessarily, but the feeling of belonging, of shared breath, of gentle hands in the dark. And though Neanderthals did not build cities or write lullabies, they too had homes. Not fixed, but familiar. Hearths flickering in caves, soft bedding of moss and fur. The hush of winter winds just beyond the stone walls, and at the center of it all, families. Tonight we wander into the quiet heart of Neanderthal life, the family. Let's begin with the smallest of them all, the children. Neanderthal children were not miniature adults. Their skeletons, though similar to ours, reveal growth patterns unique to their kind. Their brains developed faster, their faces grew longer sooner, but in their gestures and their footprints pressed into soft cave mud, we see something universal: playfulness, curiosity, vulnerability. One site in France preserves a line of child-sized footprints, weaving beside larger ones. A small foot paused here, then skipped forward. A game? A distraction? Perhaps they were gathering wood, or just wandering. In Spain, a group of Neanderthals once painted handprints on a cave wall. Among them, the hand of a child. Smaller. Messier. Left deliberately, a mark of presence. A whisper across millennia. I was here. Their toys? We cannot say. No spinning tops or painted dolls survive, but bones shaped into smooth, rounded objects suggest play. Or perhaps they simply mimicked their elders, grinding pigments, tapping stones, pretending to hunt shadows. They were nurtured. We know this. Burial sites show children laid carefully, sometimes with shells or red ochre. A child's skull in Dediria Cave, Syria, was tucked gently into a grave. The position wasn't random. Someone had cradled that child, laid them down softly. This is not the behavior of brutes. This is the gesture of mourning. Neanderthal mothers likely breastfed for several years, as evidenced by isotopes in fossilized teeth. They weaned slowly, feeding their little ones bits of chewed meat, softened roots, warmth from their own mouths. Fathers, too, were part of this tender world. Though we cannot watch them, we can feel their presence. In shared shelters, in tools shaped for small hands, in healed injuries suggesting care beyond necessity. This was not just survival, it was community. Groups were small, perhaps 10 to 15, individuals, sometimes larger in times of need. These weren't wandering loners, but clusters of kin, grandparents possibly, elder siblings, cousins maybe. A web of familiarity in a world of uncertainty, and though they lacked writing, they passed knowledge forward. A child learning to strike flint wasn't left alone. They were guided, hands over hands, patient repetition. A song without words. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, the body of an old man was found. He had survived a lifetime of injuries, a crushed arm, blindness in one eye, partial deafness. And yet, he lived well into old age. Someone fed him, cleaned him, walked beside him. This is what family means. In daily life, Neanderthal groups would have moved with the seasons. Some caves show evidence of long-term occupation, ashes layered deep, tools scattered in familiar patterns. Others suggest shorter stays, but wherever they went, they built order, fire pits, sleeping circles, shared spaces. They ate together. Meat mostly, deer, ibex, even mammoth when fortune smiled, but also plants, nuts, mushrooms. They roasted, boiled, and in some cases seasoned. Charred seeds and grains have been found in their hearths. Not just eaten, but chosen. Imagine a Neanderthal child wrinkling their nose at bitter herbs, only to be coaxed into a taste with a piece of roasted marrow. The dynamics of dinner haven't changed much. Their sense of home extended beyond shelter. They buried their dead close by, in or near their caves. Death was not hidden. It was integrated. Graves were not elaborate, but they were intentional. A shallow pit, a body curled on its side, sometimes with objects, sometimes with pigment, always with care. And what of love? It's hard to measure affection in bones, but in every healed wound, In every child's footprint beside an elder's, in every grave smoothed by patient hands, we see it. Love may not need words. It may only need presence. And so, in the flickering world of the Neanderthals, we find echoes of our own hearts, not in grand gestures, but in the small ones, the quiet ones, a shared meal, a steady hand, a feather tucked behind a child's ear. That is family, and it has always been. So tonight as you rest, picture them, not as relics, but as relatives. A mother drawing shapes in ash for her child, a father carving a toy from bone, a grandparent humming softly as firelight dances on the walls. These were the children of the cold, and in their warmth, we remember what it means to belong. Before supermarkets, before farms, before even the idea of owning a bowl, there were the beasts. They moved across the Ice Age world like slow storms, massive, thick-furred, horned or tusked, breathing steam in the cold dawn. They were not prey, in the modern sense. They were monuments of meat and danger, and the Neanderthals followed them, not recklessly, not with bravado, but with patience, with skill, with silence. Tonight we walk beside them, not to hunt ourselves, but to watch, to understand how survival was not only strength, but choreography. Picture this, the low plains of what we now call Germany, some 60,000 years ago. The snow is packed, the air thin and sharp. A herd of woolly rhinoceroses moves slowly across the horizon, their ears flicking, heads low. Behind a ridge, Neanderthals wait. Not many, perhaps 7, maybe 9. They have no bows, no long-range weapons. Their tools are spears, heavy and fire-hardened, sometimes tipped with flint. And yet they do not charge. They coordinate. One signals. Another circles. The youngest watches the wind. This is not a story of brute force. It is a story of deep knowledge, of the land, of the animal, of each other. Studies of Neanderthal tools and bones show that many of their kills were from up close, shockingly close. They didn't trap prey from afar, they confronted it. Some researchers suggest they used thrusting spears, not throwing ones. That means eye contact. That means stepping into danger, and yet they did it again and again. Why? Because one mammoth, properly butchered, could feed a group for weeks. It provided not just meat, but hide for shelter, sinew for binding, bone for tools. Nothing was wasted. At the site of La Côte de Saint-Brelade, off the coast of modern-day Jersey, archaeologists found remains of mammoths and woolly rhinos clustered at the base of a cliff. It's possible Neanderthals drove these animals over the edge, an early form of strategic hunting. Not with chaos, but with planning. And they didn't hunt only giants. Reindeer, deer, boars, ibex, all were on the menu. Some hunts were group affairs, others solitary. A single Neanderthal, crouched in snow, waiting for hours for the right moment. Their bodies bore the cost. Fossil evidence shows that Neanderthals suffered many injuries, broken bones, healed fractures, similar to modern rodeo riders. This wasn't an easy life, but it was a chosen one. And they didn't just attack, they tracked. To follow a herd across changing landscapes meant understanding patterns. They read hoofprints, scat, broken branches. They listened. They waited. This was survival as symphony, each member playing their part. The strongest took the lead, the nimblest flanked, the elders advised, the young learned by watching. Sometimes they failed. There were lean seasons, missed throws, wounded hunters. But failure didn't mean abandonment. In one site, a Neanderthal with a crushed foot lived on for years. He could no longer hunt. So others must have hunted for him, because survival wasn't just about catching the beast. It was about sharing the meat. And oh, the meals they made. Evidence shows they cooked meat over open flame, often roasting it directly on coals. They may have boiled bones to make broth. In some places, they appear to have seasoned food with herbs and even used certain plants for medicinal purposes. This wasn't just feeding. This was nourishment, ritual. And with every bite, they told, Silent stories of risk, of reward, of who had done what and when. A successful hunt was a memory, a myth in the making. Did they celebrate? Perhaps. We can imagine it, though we cannot prove it. The fire high, the smell of roasted marrow in the air. The youngest ones wide-eyed at the tale of the day's hunt. Someone gestures with a half-eaten bone, reenacting the moment the beast turned. Laughter rises, a shared breath of pride. Because every successful hunt was not just a meal, it was proof of skill, of unity, of life continuing for another day, and, in this cold world, continuing was no small feat. They hunted with heart, with hands, with history. So tonight let us honor the hunters, not for their violence, but for their grace, for their quiet planning, for their courage, for the way they stood between their families and the cold and said, in action if not in words, I will bring us through. The great beasts are gone now, the mammoths, the cave lions, the woolly rhinos, all silent, but their echoes remain. And in the firelit caves of our memory, the Neanderthals are still tracking, still watching, still waiting for the right moment. Not because they were brutes, but because they were brilliant. The earth, even in its quietest moments, is never still. Beneath our feet it shifts and breathes. Above, clouds gather and flee. And for the Neanderthals, who lived without maps or calendars, the world changed not just from day to day, but from age to age. Tonight we follow them not through cities or kingdoms, but through weather, through the slow, vast rhythms of an earth still finding its shape. The Neanderthals lived during the Pleistocene epoch, a time of glacial cycles, when the planet swung like a great pendulum between warmth and cold. The ice never stayed still. It advanced, it retreated. Mountains of it groaned and cracked and reached south like ghostly fingers. Sometimes the world was green, rolling hills, bright summers, rivers flowing with meltwater. Flowers bloomed, animals grazed, and life moved freely. But then, sometimes, often, the cold returned. Not just cold like winter, but cold like memory. Cold that hung in the air for centuries. Cold that turned forests into frozen deserts and rivers into still, silent glass. The Neanderthals did not fight the ice. They lived with it. They moved when they had to. Their world was not one of borders, but of possibilities. When the trees thinned, they followed the herds. When snow deepened, they found shelter, caves, cliff overhangs, riverbanks. They didn't build houses, but they shaped the land. They stacked stones, shaped walls, hung skins across openings to keep out the wind. Archaeological evidence shows that in colder times, Neanderthals clustered more tightly. They shared warmth, worked together, focused on survival. But in warmer, interglacial periods, they spread out again, explored, returned to places they had known. Their tools changed with the seasons. Flint from different sources appears in different layers. Their diets shifted. More plants in warm times, more meat in the cold. And they remembered. They must have. A group that returned to a cave after 20 winters had passed. That group knew stories. They remembered the bend in the river, the taste of a certain root, the way the morning light touched the cave wall. Climate shaped their choices, but not their will. In southern Europe, Neanderthals endured relatively milder conditions. In the north, they braved long, dark winters. Some even reached what we now call Siberia, living in regions where modern humans would struggle to last a week. How did they stay warm? Clothing, of course. Though no garments remain, bone awls and hide scrapers suggest they wore furs, tailored, fitted, not just draped over shoulders, but stitched with care. And fire, always fire. They maintained it through storms, shared it with travelers, used it to dry meat, to harden spears, to sing beside. Some scientists believe they may have had portable fire pits carrying embers in bark or stone, tiny hearths of hope. And still, the cold came. Again and again, at times it drove them south. At times it took them. There are layers of ash in caves that speak of volcanic eruptions, Dark winters that followed where the sun disappeared and plants withered. The so-called Campanian ignimbrite eruption, around 39,000 years ago, may have devastated parts of their population, but this was not a single blow. It was part of a pattern, a world forever shifting between ice and fire. Through all this, the Neanderthals adapted. Their bodies were built for cold, short limbs, stocky frames, thick skin. They didn't just survive, they belonged. But climate, change takes its toll, even on the most resilient. Resources shift, prey disappears, competition arrives, and that is what happened. In the latter part of their existence, the climate began to shift yet again, slowly, subtly. Forests changed, rain patterns altered, and from the south, a new kind of human arrived. Homo sapiens, us. We'll speak more of that soon. But for now, let us return to the Neanderthals, to a family huddled in a cave, listening to the crack of ice outside, to a child peeking through a fur curtain watching snow drift like ash, to a hunter feeling the wind and knowing, by scent alone, that the elk had moved on. They lived in a world that refused to sit still, and yet they stayed, not just for a season, but for over 300,000 years. Think of that. They weathered storms older than our cities, adapted to landscapes that changed shape with the centuries, not with despair, not with complaint, but with understanding, with movement, with fire. So tonight, as you rest beneath your modern roof, warmed by modern means, think of them, of the Neanderthal child born beneath a sky filled not with stars, but with falling snow, of the mother who shaped a fur coat by firelight, of the old man who remembered the river that froze 2 generations before. They lived in a world of ice and fire, and they endured, because that is what they knew best: how to stay, how to bend, but not break, how to live when the world changed, quietly, bravely, together. The fire has long gone out. The caves are quiet now, and the footpaths worn by generations of Neanderthals have softened back into earth. But not all of them faded. Not everything vanished. Because while the bones are buried, while the voices have long since stilled, part of the Neanderthals is still with us. So close, in fact, that they walk with us every day. Not beside us, within us. It's a quiet truth, but a powerful one. Modern humans, especially those of non-African ancestry, carry Neanderthal DNA not by accident, not by design, but by mingling, by connection, by moments of contact so ancient, so buried in time that even the mountains have shifted since. When scientists first sequenced the Neanderthal genome in the early 21st century, they weren't expecting that. They expected difference, distance, a family resemblance perhaps, but nothing more. And yet, when they compared that ancient sequence to modern human DNA, something extraordinary appeared. A match, a percentage, a whisper. For many of us alive today, roughly 1 to 2% of our genetic code is inherited from Neanderthals. Some people carry slightly more, a few slightly less, but what matters is not the number, it is the story the number tells. It tells us that somewhere, perhaps on a cold spring morning in a green Ice Age valley, a group of Homo sapiens met a group of Neanderthals. They did not flee. They did not fight. They stayed, and something passed between them. Perhaps there was curiosity in their eyes. Perhaps there was laughter. Perhaps there was only warmth in the midst of long winter. We will never know their names, their words, the shape of their bond, but we know they left something behind. Children, and those children carried the spark of both species. They weren't Neanderthal, they weren't entirely Homo sapiens, they were something between, and their children, and their children. So it continued, until that mingling faded into time, but not into silence, because the DNA remains. It lives in the little corners of who we are, in how we respond to illness, how we metabolize fat, how our skin reacts to sunlight. Neanderthal DNA, has been linked to traits we still carry today, some helpful, some quirky, some quietly mysterious. Do you find yourself especially alert in low light? Thank Neanderthals. Do you have thicker hair or a strong sense of smell? It might come from them. Even mood, susceptibility to melancholy, to overthinking, to waking in the early hours with a mind full of fog, has, in some cases, been traced to Neanderthal heritage. It is not science fiction, it is science unfolding like a quiet poem, because this isn't just about traits or genes, it's about connection. For centuries, the Neanderthals were treated as outsiders, as failed experiments, as brutish and doomed. But now we know they were never truly gone. They live in our blood, in our bones, in the unspoken memory that sometimes stirs when we see snowfall, or sit in silence near a fire, or look at the stars with a feeling we cannot quite name. Perhaps that's why the discovery stirred so many hearts. It wasn't just a scientific triumph. It was a reunion, a realization that the great us and them was never so separate after all. That human history is not a straight line, but a braid, woven, winding, warm. Some of our ancestors were Neanderthals, not in spirit, but in body. In fact, their lives fed into ours. Their DNA still hums in the rhythm of our blood, and that changes everything. It means the Neanderthals are not extinct in the cold sense of the word. They have become part of something larger, not erased, remembered. Imagine, then, that deep within you there is a flicker of a memory that is not yours. A remembered cold, a remembered fire, a remembered lullaby in a language never written down. Some scientists even believe that a few of the genes associated with our creativity, our boldness, our restlessness, may have come from them. From those who watched the mammoth pass, from those who painted with ochre and tied feathers in their hair. And so when you lie in bed tonight as the room grows still and your thoughts begin to drift, know this: you are not alone. You are the sum of many. You are the child of snow, and fire and breath shared long ago in caves now collapsed. You carry their stories not in your memory, but in your marrow. Not in your thoughts, but in your cells. This is the legacy of deep time. It doesn't ask for your attention. It simply is. So let your breath slow. Let your heart soften. And imagine, a Neanderthal woman sits by a hearth, humming softly to a child with hair like yours. A Neanderthal man laughs, his eyes crinkling in a way you recognize, though you've never seen his face. They are not ghosts. They are kin, still walking beside you, unseen but never unfelt, still written in your blood in quiet script, still echoing, still here. Disappearance has many forms. Sometimes it arrives like a storm, fast, loud, undeniable. But more often, especially in nature, it comes slowly, like dusk, like breath, fading in sleep. The Neanderthals, whose lives we've followed across stone and fire and snow, did not vanish in a single moment. There was no great disaster, no final battle, no echoing last cry. Instead, they dwindled softly, like embers cooling in a hearth. Tonight, we listen to that fading, not with fear, not with pity, but with curiosity, because their ending was not simple, and it was not meaningless. Let's begin with the question that lingers in every cave their bones have ever been found. Why did they go? Tens of thousands of years ago, the Neanderthals roamed widely, from the Atlantic shores to the cold steppes of Siberia. They had survived for over 300,000 years. That's longer than we've been here. They endured ice ages, hunted giant beasts, raised children, buried their dead. But around 40,000 years ago, the archaeological record begins to change. Caves once bustling with activity, bone fragments, fire pits, tools, grow quiet. Sites that were inhabited for centuries show no signs of return. And then, they are gone. The last known Neanderthal sites, places like Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar, show occupation, until perhaps as late as 37,000 years ago. But even those were small, isolated holdouts. So what happened? The truth is, there is no single answer. Climate change played a role. The world was never still in their time. Glaciers advanced and retreated like slow-moving seas. Rivers changed course. Forests turned to tundra and back again. In such a world, survival depended not just on strength, but on adaptation. The Neanderthals were well adapted to cold. Their bodies were compact and powerful, built for conserving heat. They were skilled hunters, close range and precise. But as environments shifted, new challenges arose. New prey patterns, new foraging demands, different food sources. At the same time, another species began to arrive, us Homo sapiens. From Africa, through the Middle East, into Europe, we spread. We brought with us new technologies, longer-range weapons, symbolic art, broader social networks. It's tempting to imagine a clash, a dramatic confrontation, one species defeating another. But there is little evidence of violence. Instead, what we see is quieter, a slow replacement, overlapping territories, parallel existences, and in that overlap, contact. We didn't just see each other. We knew each other, we spoke, shared, likely traded, and yes, we had children together, which means that the Neanderthals didn't truly vanish. They merged. Interbreeding didn't happen constantly, but it happened enough. And those children carried genes from both worlds. Over time, perhaps slowly, the distinct cultural and genetic identity of the Neanderthals was absorbed. A few groups may have survived longer in remote areas, but their numbers dwindled. Small populations are vulnerable, not only to predators but to chance. A bad winter, a failed hunt, a single illness, over time, fewer births, more fragile elders, and then a season with no return. No one left to light the fire, and silence, but not extinction in the harshest sense, because their genes lived on, in us, and their tools were remembered, adapted, their shelters reused. Their presence persisted. It just changed form. This is not failure. This is transition. Human history is rarely about dominance. It's about entanglement, about how one story folds into another. Think of it like this. Two rivers flowing separately meet in a floodplain. They merge, not with violence, but with inevitability. And once joined, you can no longer say where one ends and the other begins. That is the Neanderthal story. They didn't vanish. They became part of something larger. Yes, their voices are gone, their faces unrecorded, but their bones speak, their tools endure, and their blood pulses quietly in the veins of millions, perhaps even yours. And so, tonight, let us not mourn the Neanderthals. Let us sit with their quiet ending. Let us imagine the last small group, perhaps huddled in a coastal cave watching the waves roll in. A fire burns low. A child hums. They do not know they are the last. They know only that the wind is colder this year, that the reindeer moved farther north, that a new kind of people now pass through the valley. But they stay, as long as they can. And when the final moment comes, it is not marked with fear, only with stillness, like the falling of the final snow. And in that snow, a footprint, not lost, only waiting to be found again. Long after the fires went out, long after the last footsteps faded from the earth, the bones remained, not lying atop the soil, but tucked beneath it, wrapped in dust and time, guarded by stone and silence. And so it was not the Neanderthals who told their own story, but the earth whispering on their behalf. Tonight we walk into that hush, into the cool, shadowed chambers of the past where the bones still speak, not loudly but clearly. The first discoveries came by accident. A skull here, unearthed during mining. A femur there, eroded from a cave wall. At first, they puzzled scientists. These bones were human, and yet they weren't. The shapes were wrong. The skulls too long, the brows too bold, the limbs too thick. But as more were found, in Spain, in Croatia, in Iraq, in France, a picture began to emerge. These were not outliers, not anomalies. They were a people, the Neanderthals, and their bones. They carried stories. Each fracture, each wear pattern, each groove where a muscle once clung told us not only how they lived, but how they felt. Take Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq. There, in the cool depths of the rock, lies one of the most moving discoveries ever made: the remains of a man, now known as Shanidar. 1. He lived a hard life. His right arm had been crushed, likely in childhood. His skull bore signs of trauma. One eye was blind, he was partially deaf, he had difficulty walking, and yet he lived for decades. Someone had cared for him, fed him, protected him, sat beside him while the wind howled outside. His survival was not an accident. It was compassion, preserved in calcium and silence. Not far from him, another body, Shanidar IV, was found with traces of pollen around the burial pit. Some believe this to be evidence of flowers placed intentionally. A funeral, perhaps, a gesture of beauty and grief, or perhaps simply love. Then there is La Chapelle aux Saints in France, where a nearly complete Neanderthal skeleton was found, curled in a shallow grave, hands tucked gently by the body, not tossed, not forgotten, placed, and encima de los huesos in Spain, over 6,000 bones from at least 28 individuals were discovered at the base of a vertical shaft, carefully deposited. A kind of prehistoric crypt. The bones tell us not only of death but of life. The wear on their teeth suggests they used their mouths as tools, gripping, stripping, slicing. Their joints show stress, especially in the arms and shoulders, evidence of repetitive movement, likely from thrusting spears or carrying heavy loads. But they also show healing, injury, followed by recovery. Again and again, the bones show us a people who endured, who supported, who didn't abandon their own. Even the children's bones, small, fragile, reveal a life lived with care. Some show signs of nutritional stress during hard winters, but others suggest long, well-fed childhoods with growing teeth, sturdy limbs, and healed scrapes. We also find tools, not only flint blades and scrapers, but purposefully sharpened points, bone awls, birch tar, an adhesive made through a complex process involving fire and sealed chambers. Each item is a message. We understood, we made, we remembered how, and the placement of items matters too. In some caves, tools are found in the same layers as bones, suggesting they were buried together. In others, pigments, red ochre, yellow clays. Not just survival, expression, art without canvas, gesture without words. Cave after cave, we find more. At Mezmaiskaya in the Caucasus, the tiny skeleton of an infant no more than a few weeks old, a child who never walked but whose burial suggests a tenderness we can still feel. At Krapina in Croatia, over 800 Neanderthal fossils, an entire population frozen in time. At El Cidrón in Spain, bones that hint at family groups, parents and children perhaps resting side by side, and still the bones keep coming, each one adding a verse to the quiet song of their existence. But bones are not just physical, they carry memory. In the grooves of a molar, a lifetime of meals. In the curve of a femur, 100 journeys through the woods. In the tiny crack of a rib, a story of one unlucky hunt and survival. Science reads these bones like Braille, gently. We do not listen with ears, we listen with care, with questions, with awe. Because what the bones truly tell us is that the Neanderthals were never what we thought. They were not beasts, not broken versions of us. They were people, different in shape, but not in soul. They loved, they healed, they honored. And tonight, as you imagine the cold stone floors of those ancient caves, know this: the Neanderthals are not silent. They are still speaking, bone by bone, cave by cave, memory by memory. Long before cookbooks and cutlery, before fire pits turned into ovens and meals into menus, there were hands in the earth, strong hands, cold hands, curious hands, Neanderthal hands. And what they reached for, whether root, fruit, or flesh, tells us much about the world they lived in and the lives they shaped day by day. Tonight, We gather around a fire of long ago and explore the slow, silent ritual of eating. Not just the act, but the meaning, the care, the ancient choreography of survival and satisfaction. What did Neanderthals eat? The answer, like most things in their world, is both simple and layered. They were omnivores. Not just meat eaters, though meat played a central role, but plant eaters too, foragers, scavengers, opportunists, gardeners of the wild. Let's start with the meat. Neanderthals lived in Ice Age Europe and Asia, cold lands rich in large animals, mammoths, woolly rhinos, deer, bison, ibex. They were skilled hunters. Their tools, short, heavy spears, were suited to close-range attacks. Their bodies, thick with muscle and bone, could bring down prey that would terrify us today. At sites like La Côte de Saint-Brelade, in what is now Jersey, they may have coordinated hunts to drive animals off cliffs. Elsewhere, butchered bones show marks from flint knives, precise, efficient, practiced, and they used everything, meat, of course. But also marrow, sucked from bones, organs, rich in nutrients, fat, precious for energy. Even sinew and skin were valued for tools and shelter. But they were not reckless hunters. They understood the land, knew the herds, followed the seasons. They likely had preferred cuts, favored prey, seasonal strategies, and when the hunt failed, they adapted. They scavenged from lion kills, dug through snow for rodents, cracked old bones to get at the last sweetness inside. But meat was only half the story. Recent research, especially from dental calculus, the hardened plaque left on ancient teeth, has revealed a much more diverse diet. Trapped in that calculus are tiny particles, starch grains, plant fibers, traces of cooked food, and what they reveal is fascinating. Neanderthals ate wild barley, water lilies, mushrooms, pine nuts, legumes, berries, seaweed. They ground seeds, roasted tubers, may have boiled plant matter into broths or stews. In some sites, evidence of bitter herbs suggests they flavored their meals or used plants for medicine. They were not blindly chewing, they were choosing. Their meals were not elaborate, but they were thoughtful. And always they were shared. Food was not an individual experience, it was gathered together, hunted together, cooked, if not communally, then close. We find hearths with ash and concentric rings suggesting places to sit, to talk, to eat. Imagine it, a deer haunch roasting over embers, a child chewing sweet roots, a grandmother picking ash from her fingers after stirring something warm in a stone bowl. Even in the cold, even in scarcity, there was nourishment, not just of the body, of the spirit. We can't know how they said grace, if they did, but we know they paused, ate together, and that matters. At El Cedron in Spain, bones of a Neanderthal family group show signs of shared meals. The ratios of isotopes in their bones, tiny chemical signatures, tell us they all ate similar things. This was not a hierarchy, it was harmony. Even in death, their teeth whisper what they loved. Some had heavy wear from tough meat, others from fibrous plants. A few even showed damage from cracking nuts, and every now and then, a surprise. At one site, traces of cooked wild, pulses, plants toxic when raw, which means they knew to heat them. They didn't just gather, they prepared. There is poetry in that, to take what the earth gives and make it more, to shape hunger into ritual. We see scorch marks on stones, perhaps early pots, heated rocks and watertight hides dropped into liquid to cook grain, soup of a kind, warmth that went beyond fire. And in that warmth, stories. Not told aloud perhaps, but felt. The story of who found the food, who cooked it best, who remembered where the berries grew last summer. Food binds us. It always has. In Neanderthal life, it was a thread that ran through every day. And though we no longer roast meat on open fires beneath stone ceilings, though we eat with forks and think in calories, that thread is still there. In our need to gather, to share, to taste and remember. So tonight, as you lie in the soft hush of your own evening, picture it. A Neanderthal woman, turning a rabbit over the flames. A man, chewing slowly, thinking of the next day's hunt. A child, giggling as juice from a bitter berry stains their lips. And in the shadows, elders watching, remembering, not just what they ate, but why it mattered. Because every bite, every sip, was an act of staying alive, but also an act of being together, and that perhaps is what truly nourished them, and what still nourishes us. After the hunt was over, after the roots were gathered, after the fire had been fed and the last embers settled into a soft red glow, there was rest. Even in a world of ice and danger, of shifting seasons and constant movement, there came a time, each day when the Neanderthals closed their eyes and slept. Tonight we join them, not as scientists, not as observers, but as fellow dreamers. We enter their quiet, stone-walled shelters and watch the rhythms of rest unfold in a time before clocks, before mattresses, before the world turned so loud. Where did Neanderthals sleep? Mostly in caves. Not always the deep, echoing caverns of our imagination, but in shallow shelters, overhangs, and stone pockets nestled into hillsides. They chose carefully. Not every cave was a home. The entrance mattered. The direction of wind, the slope of the ground, the availability of firewood. A good sleeping place was dry, warm, and close enough to resources, but also safe from predators. Inside, they made it theirs. In many archaeological sites, we find signs of structured living spaces. Sleeping areas often appear to be toward the back, quieter, darker, away from the cold breath of night. In El Salt, in Spain, and La Ferracie in France, layers of ash and bone suggest repeated use of certain spots. Not random, but remembered. They brought in furs, moss, grass, created bedding, not just to soften the stone, but to insulate, to cradle. And the scent of smoke, constant in those shelters, likely kept insects away. This wasn't a bed in our modern sense, but it was a place of comfort, a nest carved into the cold. And in that nest, they laid their children, curled against loved ones, listened to the wind outside and let their breathing slow. Sleep was not just recovery, it was trust. To close your eyes in a wild world is to say, I am safe here, and they were, together. We don't know their rituals. If they had lullabies. If someone took first watch by the fire. If elders rose in the night to add wood or whisper stories to restless grandchildren. But we can guess. Because human rest has always carried the same rhythm. Warmth, stillness. A soft place to lie, and perhaps a dream or two. What did they dream of? Theories abound about Neanderthal consciousness, but none can answer that. Still, if we imagine the minds that shaped tools, painted with ochre, buried their dead, we must imagine minds capable of dreaming, perhaps of mammoths, of firelight, of places once walked, now distant, dreams not unlike our own. In a cave in Italy, researchers found signs of bedding layered and renewed, reeds and ash used again and again, refreshed by choice. This wasn't survival. It was care, comfort, preference. Some sites even show signs of cleaned areas, waste moved outside, sleeping spots kept orderly. Even in rest, they created a kind of home, not in bricks, but in habit, in the choosing of a corner, the way one blanket is favored over another. Sleep reveals the most honest part of a species, the unguarded, the peaceful. And so the Neanderthals sleep before us in time, not as figures of bone and theory, but as people. People who lay down beside the fire and listened to the soft breath of kin. People who felt the rhythm of rain on stone, who woke slowly, who stirred when children rolled too far from the warmth, who pulled the hides closer and watched the flames flicker one last time before closing their eyes again. The archaeologist's brush uncovers tools, bones, fire pits. But the bedding, that often turns to dust, except in the places where time was kind. There we see the layers. Grass flattened, ash laid beneath to deter insects, fur residue in corners, evidence of deliberate rest, and that matters, because it tells us something very simple and very deep. They valued comfort. They prepared for sleep. They didn't collapse from exhaustion each night. They chose how to end the day. And in that choice, we see ourselves even now, so many thousands of years later. What do we crave at day's end? A soft place, a quiet room, the presence of someone near, or a good memory to hold. That's what they had, in their own way. And as they slept, beneath the same moon we see now, their world turned gently. The animals quieted, the fires dimmed, and inside those caves, breath by breath, the Neanderthals rested. So tonight, close your eyes too. Feel the stone beneath you soften into fur. Let the weight of a long day lift, and know that across time, across language, across species, the need to sleep in safety and warmth in the company of silence is older than history and utterly, beautifully shared. There are questions older than words. What happens when we die? Why does the sky rumble? Where does the sun go at night? Even before language shaped answers, before stories had structure or names had meaning, these questions must have stirred in early minds. And tonight we ask a quiet, wondering question of our ancient cousins. What did the Neanderthals believe? Not in temples or doctrines, not in gods with carved faces, but in the soft, shapeless way that belief begins. A glance upward, a pause in the storm, a body laid gently in the earth. The bones they left behind do not speak in verses. There are no written prayers. But belief doesn't always leave scripture. Sometimes it leaves flowers. Let's return for a moment to Shanidar Cave in the mountains of northern Iraq. There, as we've seen, Neanderthal burials have stirred wonder for decades. In one grave, the remains of a man, Shanidar IV, were found with pollen grains from wildflowers. Some have argued this was natural, blown in by wind or carried by animals, but others suggest something deeper, that the flowers were placed, chosen, not just for scent or color, but for meaning. Some of those flowers, interestingly, are known today for medicinal properties, pain relief, inflammation. So were they tokens of healing or symbols of parting? Perhaps both. In El Cidrón, in Spain, a family group was buried in a small chamber, 8 individuals close together. No signs of violence, no scattering, just togetherness. In La Chapelle-aux-Saints, France, a Neanderthal man was placed carefully in a shallow pit, his limbs arranged, his grave marked by the absence of debris that should have fallen naturally. These are not haphazard ends. They suggest care. And where there is care, there may be belief. Belief in memory. Belief in something beyond breath, even if that beyond had no name. Did Neanderthals fear death? Maybe. Or perhaps they accepted it, as they accepted snow and fire and night. But what seems clear is this: they marked it, and marking is the beginning of meaning. Now lift your gaze with me, from the grave to the sky. The Neanderthals lived under vast heavens. No cities dimmed the stars. No satellites crossed their path. They saw the Milky Way not as a concept, but as a river of cold fire. They saw full moons bright enough to cast shadows. They saw storms roll in from miles away, lightning dancing across open plains. Did they think the sky was watching? Did they tell stories by firelight about what thunder meant? Did they point to the constellations and say, "That's where the old ones went"? We don't know, but we feel something when we imagine it, because awe is universal and awe often grows into belief. They may have had rituals, not grand, but personal. A feather laid on a sleeping child. A red ochre mark smeared on a forehead before a hunt. A chant, low and rhythmic, to soothe the wind or steady the spirit. No one taught them these things from books. They simply felt them, like we do. Because belief at its root is not about proof, it's about presence. The feeling that there is more, that a moment matters, that a life once gone, still lingers, and that some things, storm, silence, the stars, are bigger than understanding. Some researchers believe Neanderthals may have practiced totemism, marking places with symbols, returning to sacred spots. Others suggest they saw caves not just as homes, but as wombs of the earth, places of birth, rest, and return. Consider the darkness of a deep cave flickering with firelight, sounds softened, shapes shifting. It would feel otherworldly. Sacred, perhaps. In that space, stories might grow, not written, not spoken clearly, but felt. Whispers passed from mother to child, from elder to hunter. Not instructions, but truths, shaped by time. We cannot say what they believed, only that they believed something. Because they didn't just live, they reflected, they chose, they created meaning. And that is the seed of all belief. So tonight, as you lie beneath your own ceiling, flat or starry, think of them. Of a Neanderthal standing alone beneath a meteor shower, watching the sky burn quietly. Of another laying their hand on a stone wall, pressing pigment into the shape of memory. Of a family gathered in silence after a loss, sitting not in despair, but in stillness. Because belief is not always loud. Sometimes it's a hush. Sometimes it's a hand held tight. Sometimes it's the feeling that the world has layers we cannot see but can almost touch, and in that we are not so different, not from each other and not from them. Some meetings are planned, others happen by chance. But the most meaningful ones, the ones that ripple through time, are often neither. They simply happen. Two paths, wandering across vast landscapes, slowly and unknowingly drawing closer. Until one day they cross. That is the kind of meeting we speak of tonight. A quiet convergence not in a city or a battlefield, but on the edge of a forest, by a riverbank, or perhaps in the hush of a glacial valley. The meeting between us, Homo, sapiens, and them, the Neanderthals. Two kinds of humans, two travelers from different directions, both shaped by hardship, both bearing fire and memory. For generations, the tale was told as one of conquest, that we arrived and they disappeared, that we were clever and they were not, that we thrived and they failed. But time and science and a better kind of listening have taught us something gentler. The truth is more nuanced, more human. It begins, as so many stories do, with movement. Tens of thousands of years ago, Homo sapiens began to spread from Africa, following animals, water, seasons. They were new to the landscapes of Europe and Western Asia, new to the cold, to the ice-hardened ground, to the deep forests and steep valleys. The Neanderthals were already there. They had been there for hundreds of thousands of years. They knew the caves, the herds, the stones that sparked fire best. They belonged to the land in a way that took generations to learn. So when the newcomers arrived, it must have been strange. Who were these tall, slender people with their odd tools and faster words? What did they want? Were they like us? Did they smell the same? Laugh the same? Did their eyes crinkle when they smiled? The Neanderthals must have noticed, and so must we. Two cousins meeting after lifetimes apart. At first, perhaps, they kept their distance, watched from the trees, avoided the same water sources, listened to each other's voices in the night. But eventually, something shifted. A need, a gesture, a moment. Perhaps it was trade. Meat for flint. Perhaps it was shelter shared during a sudden storm. Perhaps it was curiosity that overcame caution. And in that moment, something old and something new became something shared. They didn't speak the same language, but they didn't need to. A hand extended, a warm fire, a piece of roasted root passed between strangers. These things translate. Over time, these meetings multiplied. Not constantly, not everywhere, but enough. Enough for children to be born, children of both worlds. We know this now, not from myth, but from DNA. Inside the double helix of many modern humans especially those of non-African descent, live traces of Neanderthal genes. Not one or two, but many, passed down not once, but through generations of interbreeding. These were not singular events. They were relationships, however brief. Two peoples overlapping in time, choosing again and again not to turn away. This alone is astonishing. It tells us that the meeting was not a war. It was a blending, one that changed the shape of human history forever. Because through that mingling, Neanderthals did not truly vanish. They were absorbed. Their stories became part of ours. Their blood still moves in us, and their legacy, once thought to be a quiet failure, is actually a quiet continuation. In places like Peștera in Romania, the bones of an early Homo sapiens show recent Neanderthal ancestry, just 4 to 6 generations removed. At Bacău in Bulgaria, we see traces of this same overlap, lives that walked the same ground, breathed the same air. These were not abstractions, they were people. And yet, as time passed, the balance shifted. Homo sapiens came in larger numbers. They brought new tools, broader social networks, new strategies for survival. They moved faster, spread farther, and slowly the Neanderthals retreated, not from conflict, but from pressure, from a world changing around them too quickly. They were fewer, more isolated, and eventually, they were gone. But the meeting had happened, and from that meeting something entirely new emerged. Us, but not quite as we were before. We became a species with a shared memory, a memory of something older, a whisper in the blood, a shadow in the cheekbone, a pattern in the mind, and perhaps in the silence of deep night, a flicker of recognition when we look at an ancient face and feel, somehow, that we know them because we do. So tonight, imagine it again. A Neanderthal hunter stepping from the trees, a Homo sapiens woman crouching by a fire. They do not speak, but they look. And in that gaze, steady, unhurried, curious, there is no fear, only familiarity, only a sense that whatever path brought them here, they now share this place, this moment, this warmth. And in that shared warmth, a story begins. Not a story of one species rising and one falling, but of two meeting and making something new together. There are few things as ancient, as comforting, as universal as the fire. Long before language took its full shape, before myths were carved in stone or written on vellum, there was the flame, and around that flame, there were stories. Not as we know them, not structured or told aloud in clear sentences, but stories still told in gesture and expression, in pause. Tonight, we sit beside a Neanderthal hearth and listen. Imagine the scene, a cave, quiet, worn smooth by years of living. Smoke curling toward a dark ceiling, dancing through narrow vents carved by time and instinct. Children lie against fur and moss. Elders stretch tired limbs. The fire crackles. Outside, the wind howls softly like a forgotten lullaby, and in this hush, someone begins, perhaps with a sound, a mimic of an animal, a rhythm tapped on stone, perhaps with a scrap of ochre drawn across the ground to show the twist of a river, or the flick of fingers imitating a falling mammoth, the victorious cheer of a shared hunt. These were not just stories of fact. They were memories carried and shaped into meaning, a tale of where the bison fell last year, of the time the sky flashed and the ice cracked underfoot, of the dream someone had, a bear walking upright, whispering names. Stories do not need grammar to be real, they need intention, and the Neanderthals had it. We know this not from their words, but from what they left behind. Red handprints on cave walls, not casual markings, but deliberate, placed where the light flickers best. Symbols, perhaps, or signatures, a way to say, I was here, I matter, I remember. Some caves contain marks and patterns, scratches, dots, repeated shapes, not random, rhythmic, story-like. In El Castillo, Spain, and La Pasiega there are dots and ladders drawn in ochre. Some date back more than 64,000 years, before Homo sapiens arrived, which means Neanderthals may have been the first to draw the night into lines. And where there is drawing, there is thinking. Where there is thinking, there are stories. Some told in silence. Some passed through the generations by firelight. Picture a child asking, "Wait, why does the thunder come?" And an elder replying not with science, but a tale of a great elk that stomps across the sky, not because it's true, because it comforts, because it gives shape to fear, because it makes the night a little less large. That is the gift of story, to hold us, to carry us across the unknown. Neanderthals had large brains rich with memory and pattern. They knew cause and effect. They understood time, not in hours, but in seasons. They could imagine the unseen. And they needed each other, which means they needed stories, not just to entertain, but to teach, to guide, to grieve. A young hunter would learn not just by doing, but by hearing, where to step, when to wait, what it meant when the crows circled low. A child might learn of a brother who didn't return, and why not, but told gently, with symbols, with pauses, with warmth. Because grief too needs story, just as joy does. In the firelight, joy becomes dance, a successful hunt celebrated with mimicked movements, laughter, howls, not just noise, but narrative, lived and relived in the safety of the circle. And as they lay down to sleep, those stories stayed, wove themselves into dreams, became part of how a people remembered what mattered. Even now, we carry that thread. We still gather, still tell, still lean in when the room is dark and the voice is low. We crave the rhythm of story because it reminds us we belong, and that perhaps is what they felt too. So tonight, as your own room quiets and the day folds gently behind you, close your eyes, hear the wind outside the cave, feel the warmth of fire on your skin, and listen. A child is giggling, an elder clears their throat. The air shifts with anticipation, and someone begins to tell, not just of what happened, but of who they are and who you are. Still listening, still learning, still dreaming in the glow of stories older than time. When we vanish, we do not take everything with us. Some things remain. A footprint in soft clay, a hearth turned to ash, a blade, once sharp, now dulled by time, but still unmistakably shaped by thought. These are the tools we leave behind, and for the Neanderthals who left no temples, no cities, no scrolls or songs, their tools became their memory. Tonight, we kneel beside those memories and listen. A simple flint scraper, held once in a calloused hand, perhaps used to clean hides for clothing or bedding. To us it may seem small, rough, crude even, but it is deliberate, shaped with skill. It speaks of knowledge passed down through generations, of hands guided by other hands, of repetition that becomes craft. Neanderthal tools were part of the Mousterian tradition, an elegant system of flake technology that, though developed without writing, reveals the precision of a practiced mind. They used the levallois technique, preparing a stone core so carefully that it could produce flakes of a specific shape with a single strike. That's not random. That's design. It means they didn't just react to need. They anticipated it. They planned. They imagined a shape in the stone before it emerged. And that imagination is a kind of legacy. At sites like La Ferracie and Le Moustier in France, thousands of stone tools have been found, each with a function, each with a story. Scrapers, blades, points, notches. Some were hafted, attached to wooden handles with resin and sinew. That's chemistry, that's engineering, that's patience. Even bones were shaped into awls, into digging tools. Nothing was wasted. Everything was observed. Even the use wear on these tools tells us about rhythm. One angle smoothed by hours of scraping. One edge retouched again and again. A tool wasn't just made and discarded. It was kept, repaired, remembered. Some Neanderthal sites show caches of tools, hidden for later use. That's foresight. They may have had favorite stones, reliable sources of flint, a known hill, a certain stream bed, and they may have passed these places down like we pass down stories. Here, this is where the sharp rock sleeps. Even pigments were used as tools. Ochre ground and rubbed on skin, perhaps to protect, perhaps to decorate, traces of manganese dioxide, used possibly to aid fire starting. They weren't just reacting to the world. They were changing it, and that's what tools are, not just objects, but decisions, and every decision leaves a mark. Think of a single flake of stone, no bigger than a thumb, found thousands of years later, lifted from the earth by gentle hands, brushed clean, studied, and understood as part of a life, a meal, a gesture, a day that once was, and now is again. This is the true legacy of the Neanderthals. Not extinction, but expression. Their tools tell us they were intelligent, not just in capacity, but in curiosity. They explored material, pushed boundaries. They returned to ideas again and again, and, in doing so, they made memory. Some of their tools resemble ours. Others are entirely their own. They made what they needed, but also what they wanted. They shaped the world to fit their hands. And isn't that what we still do? They may not have carved their names, but they left behind something more honest. A mark shaped by need, by love, by daily repetition. And what survives for a reason. Because it mattered. Even now, we can hold a Neanderthal blade and feel its balance. We can run a finger along the edge and wonder, who last touched this? What were they thinking? Did they know it would last? Probably not, but it did, and now it speaks, not in words, but in shape, in the logic of its lines, in the thought behind its making. It tells us that the Neanderthals were not a lost people. They were a living people, and their life remains. So tonight, as your hands rest in stillness, imagine another pair of hands, stronger, rougher, reaching for a piece of flint. Imagine the sound of it striking stone, the sharp crack of potential, and imagine the firelight catching the edge of a newly made tool. Useful, yes, but also beautiful, because it says, I was here. I shaped this. I changed the world, even just a little. And we still hold that change, still feel that legacy, still walk among their tools, their silent, brilliant, patient tools that whisper, we were never truly gone, we are still in your hands. Not every ending is loud. Some slip by softly like the last ember in a hearth glowing faintly before it cools to ash. So it might have been for the last Neanderthal. Not a battle, not a storm, not a sudden fall, but a long, slow evening. A hush, stretched across the centuries. A candle dimming but not forgotten. Tonight let us travel not to a particular cave or carbon-dated bone, but to a moment of quiet imagining, a gentle wondering. What was it like to be the last of your kind? To carry in your body the echo of thousands before you, and to sense, however dimly, that you are walking further than any of them had gone, and perhaps alone. Let us picture the world as it might have looked. A wide, wind-swept valley. Low mist creeping along the frozen grasses. A line of trees at the edge of vision bending just slightly in the breeze. Snow is not falling, but it has fallen, coating the stones in white, muting every footstep, wrapping the earth in silence. In a small hollow at the base of a limestone outcrop, there is shelter, not deep, just enough to shield from the wind. Within it, a figure stirs. Their hands are large, powerful, shaped by generations of work. Their brow is broad, their gaze steady. Their skin is roughened by cold, by sun, by years. And they are thinking. Not in words, at least not how we speak them, but in patterns, in memory, in rhythm. This Neanderthal, the last, is not aware of that title. They do not know they are the final page of a long book. To them, it is only morning. Another cold day, a day of waking, of tending fire, of seeking food. But the world feels emptier. They remember others, not as ghosts, but as impressions. A laugh, a hand, the sound of footfall beside theirs. There are no more of those, only their own prints now, pressed into snow, filling slowly with drifting powder. They chew a strip of dried meat. They blow on the fire, coaxing it back to life. They examine a stone blade, worn from years of use, and they pause. A crow lands on a branch nearby. The wind picks up, and in that moment perhaps something deep inside them quiets, not sadness, not fear, just the weight of knowing that things have changed, that something has passed. And yet, they continue, because life does not stop to name its endings. They follow the trail of a hare through the snow. They scrape lichen from a rock. They warm their hands over the fire. They sleep, curled beneath furs, dreaming dreams no one will ever hear. And when they wake, it is still quiet. But not empty. Because even in solitude there is the world, the shifting clouds, the rising sun, the sound of melting ice dropping slowly from the cave roof. And so the last Neanderthal lives not in tragedy, but in presence, in the small exact movements of survival. They are not history yet. They are still becoming, still breathing, still part of this great shared story. And when the time comes, as it does for all of us, it is gentle, perhaps in sleep, perhaps seated by the fire, eyes drifting shut. No one is there to see it. No one sings, no one marks the hour. But it happens with grace, because what passes in that moment is not just a life, but a chapter, and all the lives before it, hundreds, thousands. They do not vanish. They settle into the soil, into memory, into us. Because the last Neanderthal is not truly gone. We carry them in our bones, in our blood, in the way we pause at firelight and feel something ancient stirring. They do not need a monument. They have legacy, the tools shaped with care, the caves still holding soot and pigment, the strand of DNA curled quietly in our cells. And now, this story, told in the hush of night, not to mourn, but to remember. Because remembering is a kind of fire too. It flickers, it warms, and it keeps what matters alive. So tonight, as you lie beneath your own sky, know this. The last Neanderthal is not lost. They have simply become part of the silence, the kind that listens and waits and glows softly at the edge of sleep. We often think of fossils as stone, hard, cold, lifeless. But what if sometimes a fossil could hold something warmer, a trace not just of bone, but of care, of love, of feeling? Tonight, we lie quietly beside the long arc of time and ask a question, not of science, but of the soul. What makes a species human? Is it the shape of the skull? The way the hand grips a tool? The fire? The footprint? Or is it something softer? Something we can't hold in our hands, but which holds us in silence, in story, in memory. The Neanderthals are gone. Their voices do not reach us. Their words are lost, but their gestures remain. And it is through these gestures, their slow, deliberate choices, that we glimpse something more than instinct. Something close to what we call feeling. At Shanidar, we found one of their own, his bones bent by old injury, his skull bearing signs of trauma. He could not have hunted, could not have gathered. He could not even see from one eye. And yet, he lived for years. That survival did not come from chance. It came from others who fed him, sheltered him, stayed beside him. That is not strategy. That is compassion. And from the depths of a cave in France, we find the remains of a child, buried carefully, positioned with tenderness. Someone stopped, someone grieved. Grief is not written in genes, it is felt. And where there is grief, there is love. Their teeth tell us even more. Worn not just from chewing, but from use as a third hand, clutching, tearing, creating. The wear was not careless, it was work, a devotion to daily life. Even in the cold and hunger, they made things beautiful. Pigments found on tools, scratched shapes on bone, traces of ochre on a shell. Why decorate something if not to express joy, or meaning, or identity? These are the fossils of feeling, not emotion as we know it, but its beginning. They shared food, shared shelter, shared time. Their fires were not only for heat, they were for gathering, where light could hold them together, where silence could be safe. And when the fire dimmed, they did not scatter. They rested. They slept near one another. They dreamed, perhaps side by side. We find bones not in chaos, but in patterns, carefully arranged. These were not discarded bodies. They were remembered lives. We do not need poems to prove they felt. We see it in the way they stayed. The way they returned to the same places again and again, to mourn, to mark, to matter. And perhaps the clearest fossil of feeling is the one we carry inside ourselves. Their DNA woven into ours, like threads of a memory we never formed but always feel. A strange recognition when we look at a Neanderthal face, that heavy brow, that steady gaze, and somehow, a whisper. You knew what love was, too, because being human is not about walking upright. Not entirely. It is about stopping beside someone who is hurt, or tired, or leaving, and saying, in gesture or in silence, I see you, I will stay. You are not alone. We don't know their names, but we know their touch, pressed into tools, into soil, into the soft corners of caves. They have no cities, but they had circles, of kin, of memory, of meaning. They did not write stories, but they lived them. And in that living, they crossed the threshold into something more. Not just survival, but shared experience. Not just being, but becoming. So tonight, as your breath slows and the room stills, remember that humanity is not only defined by language or law or invention. Sometimes it is defined by a mother wrapping fur around a sick child, by a hand reaching into cold water for one more root so another might eat, by someone carving a pattern into bone because they wanted something beautiful to outlive them. That is what makes a species human, not just bones, but the feelings left fossilized within them, still waiting, still speaking, still gently, softly, lovingly, human. We often carry stories without knowing it. In our instincts, our bodies, our emotions, there may live traces of lives far older than our own. Tonight, we look inward. We trace not the bones in caves, but the silent pulse of Neanderthal echoes within us. This is not discovery, it is rediscovery, a pause, a throttle on time. It begins with DNA, not as letters on a page, but as whispers of our shared past. Modern studies have shown that many people of Eurasian descent still carry around 1 to 2% of Neanderthal DNA in their cells. That may sound small, but in biology, even small threads can weave powerful patterns. It is a memory of contact, not conflict, a legacy of touch, exchange, and quiet blending. Imagine that long ago, a pair, Neanderthal and Homo sapiens, shared what mattered most. Not tools, not territory, but time, warmth, care. Their children carried that moment forward, not always visibly, not always celebrated, but still alive. Through generations, that blood passed on. Tiny fragments remained, hidden stories folded into our bones. Now your skin might hold patches inherited from them, genes influencing immunity, metabolism, even mood. Some of these Neanderthal genes helped early humans adapt to cold climates. Others made us more likely to wake at night, hypersensitive to smells, or prone to early arthritis. It's not destiny, it's influence. It's subtle. It's human. Growing up, you may have chewed a pen or colored a rough circle on a page with crayons. Neanderthals did the same, marking cave walls, drawing dots, embracing symbol. That hunger to draw, even before writing, may be part of a shared past. That instinct to carve, to shape, to mark. Maybe it comes from them. When you watch a fire crackle or lean into the warmth of another, there, maybe an echo of a Neanderthal hearth. The feeling that fire is home. That feeling is ancient. It is wired deep in our genes. And when you wrap yourself in fur or heavy coat and feel comforted, remember, it is a comfort first practiced tens of thousands of years ago. When we're startled by sudden noise or drawn to comfort foods in cold seasons, there may be a pattern written in time. Their survival instincts, high alert, quick reaction, attraction to warmth, food, comfort, they did not vanish with them. In many ways, they live on. When a child wakes from a nightmare and a parent rocks them, sings softly, embraces them, that thread goes back to those first caves. Not because the mother in you is Neanderthal, but because your need to comfort is universal. A gesture, repeated across species, across time. Cultural archaeologist Stephen Mithen describes humans not as individuals but as part of multiple layers: emotional, social, ecological. We are, in part, emotional beings shaped by Ice Age survivors. What does that mean in everyday life? It means empathy, the ability to read a friend's nervous glance, to recognize sorrow in a stranger's eyes, to sense danger without understanding why. These sensitivities, emotional intonation, intuitive connection, may have ancient origins. Shared. Fires taught shared feelings. In their group life, Neanderthals gathered during dark storms. They comforted the vulnerable. They shared heat. They shared grief. They shared food. So when you notice what draws your instinct, small acts, gestures of care, acts of comfort, it is old, older than history, older than writing, older than time measured in years. It is as old as humanity itself. Even your handwriting, that slanted stroke, that gentle wobble, who knows? Maybe it bears a whisper of a hand that carved pigment on stone, that placed a shell in a child's necklace, that traced a pattern in ash by lantern light. These echoes, little as they are, connect us, with them, with our nature, with our history, and with each other. Because if they were human enough to care, to create, to mourn, to laugh, then so are we. And if we carry them inside us, then we carry more than ourselves. We carry kin. We carry connection. We carry a story that refuses to end. Tonight, as your breath steadies and your heartbeat softens, close your eyes. Feel the weight of your bones against the bed. Feel warmth of skin and breath. Know that in you is a deep current, a current of mind and body forged by multiple branches of humanity. Current that nods gently in recognition. My blood knows you. It remembers. A flicker of dawn in memory. A pulse in blood. A gentle echo of a distant past. You are not just you. You are them. Still here. Still becoming. Still echoing. Still human. And now, here we are. Not at an end. Not truly. But at the slow unfolding of a pause. A long breath between stories. A soft landing after a long and thoughtful walk. We've spent the night in the company of ancient kin, and they have walked with us, not as distant relics or curiosities, but as people, as breathing, bleeding, sleeping, loving people. Neanderthals, people of the cold valleys, the smoky caves, the endless steppe, people of sharp flint and worn hands, of whispered stories and ochre dreams, of quiet courage and unrecorded beauty. We've followed their footprints in the frost, sat beside their fires, grieved their dead, and wondered at their world. And now we ask, where do we go from here? This question is not about direction. Not really. It's about meaning. It's about continuation. It's about what happens when a story sinks beneath your skin, when it leaves a warmth there, even after the last word is spoken. Because the truth is, we never truly said goodbye. We carry them still, not just in genes, though those remain, quiet passengers in our cells, but in our gestures, in the way we cradle a child, in the way we huddle close to warmth, in the way we pause sometimes and feel something in the air, a kind of echo, a shared hum of memory. Their world was slow, seasonal, repetitive, but not empty. It was full of choice, of learning, of laughter likely, of longing certainly. So as we return from their world into our own, our concrete and neon, our messages and maps, we do not leave them behind. We take with us their lessons, not written on stone, but etched into our sense of self, that a life doesn't need monuments to matter. That a fire shared is stronger than one guarded. That care can be ancient, and so we move forward. But differently now, we move forward with reverence, for simplicity, for connection, for silence. Because silence is not absence. It is space. A cradle, for memory, and memory, the soft, sticky kind that clings to our days, is what ties us to the continuum, this long, winding thread of human life. A thread that does not break, only braids, from Neanderthal to sapiens, from one fire to another, from hand to hand. They shaped stone. We shape words. They told stories in gesture. We tell them in voice. They walked slowly. We rush and sprint. But still we walk. Still we listen. And maybe, just maybe, we are ready to slow down again, to feel the cold air as they did, to sit with dusk, to make something with our hands, not for profit, but for meaning. We live in a world that rushes to forget, but tonight, we've chosen to remember, and memory is the thread of survival, not of species, but of soul. So what if we treated the future like they treated fire, not owned, but tended, passed, watched, respected? What if we saw each gesture, each bowl of food shared, each quiet night walk, each story whispered before sleep, as part of a lineage older than language? Would we not walk softer? Would we not speak kinder? Because it is humbling to know we are not the beginning, nor the end. We are simply the now, the ones holding the flame, the ones listening for the ancient song that still plays beneath the noise. We are not here to dominate the world. We are here to belong to it, as they did. So rest now. Let your breath slow. Let the noise drift away. Imagine not a world long gone, but a world still present, still breathing beneath our feet. A world where the past does not haunt, but hums. A quiet music woven into every heartbeat. You carry them. And one day someone may carry you, not with names carved in stone, but with stories, with touch, with warmth. The same warmth you felt tonight as the fire faded and their presence remained. This then is the continuum, not a line, but a circle. And you are in it, part of it, loved by it, not alone, never alone. Sleep well and carry the fire.